Hello and welcome to the very first episode of the Combat Club. My name is Mike Owens, and each week I'll be bringing you an interview or a podcast with a very special guest. And for our inaugural episode, I'm joined by the one and only Luke Thomas. Luke, it's always a pleasure. How are things with you today?
I am doing well. Happy to be here, and I didn't know this was a new venture you're starting, but I'm happy to be the maiden voyage, so to speak.
We had to get someone big on, and it's good that Trent Alexander-Arnold looks like he's staying at Liverpool rather than going to your club in Real Madrid, so we can stay friends because he is one of the favourites over here.
Fair enough. Madrid's got enough talent. We're doing all right. You can have them.
What are your expectations for the new season?
Um, I don't know. Like last season was great. Obviously adding Mbappe basically for free is insane. Losing Tony Kroos, not great, but I mean they should be able to do what they did last season, but the question, of course, is always going to be how Mbappe and Vinicius and Rodrigo all kind of get together. So I still high, but I guess a little bit of like, let's see how that part plays out.
Well, in a similar vein to how your fans get upset when you talk about boxing, we shouldn't digress onto football too much. We are here to talk about MMA, otherwise people will probably start leaving. We've just seen a massive pay-per-view, UFC 305, Dricus Du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya in the main event. Your overall reaction to what went down in Perth last Saturday?
I mean, I guess a little tiny bit of surprise, but in it not as much as other people. And what I mean by that is like, for example, yesterday was the Contender Series, and somebody asked Dana White, who of course was not in Australia for UFC 305, so this is the first chance anybody had to get the chance to talk to him, and he had said, Dricus fights like a white guy dances, but it works. Or he had Robert Whitaker. He's like, the guy just runs at you like you stole money from him, but it works. And obviously Robert Whitaker is very familiar with Dricus's game. But what I mean is there's a lot of people who were like, I saw this in the lead up to the fight. They were like, oh, Izzy is tailor-made to beat a guy who's a big bruiser who makes a lot of sort of technical errors. And on one level, that is obviously true because you just look at who he's beaten. That profiles a guy who he's beaten quite a number of times. But I didn't feel it was the right way to look at this fight. I mean, I was definitely 1 billion% one of these guys heading into the Robert Whitaker fight, and I got mocked by the South African fans quite rightly for it. I was like, oh, this big ass goofball, he's going to get worked like a summer job. And then, of course, he stops Whitaker, and you're like, well, how did that happen? And that was a huge wake up call for me. I realized there is a degree of physicality, functionality, and tenaciousness to Du Plessis' game that is often overlooked because he does these lunging kind of, excuse me, almost knocked over my coffee cup, these lunging kind of off balance blitzes and other stuff, weird stuff he throws. But the reality is, to just look at the results themselves. So I think there's two major takeaways I would have. One is that like this is now Du Plessis' division. Now maybe Sean Strickland will beat him. I'm sure we'll talk about what's next. But like if you beat Whitaker and Strickland and Izzy back to back to back, and you stop two of those three guys, it's your division. It's your division. And whatever you want to say about the beauty or the technical smoothness of DDP's game, the idea that he's just another middleweight bruiser is so clearly not true. And for those other reasons I mentioned, you can tell there's something more to it. I think the second point that I would make is about Izzy in particular. He did not look bad to me. I did not look at him and get the sense, and maybe you feel differently, but I didn't get the sense that he was washed. I didn't get the sense that like this was like oh man, there was so much ring rust. He looked a little older. I will say that. But it was a decent Izzy. It was a good Izzy, and so the value of the win is high. I think the only takeaway I would have about Izzy is I don't know if he has the same competitive fire anymore, which I think is understandable given that he's fought over 100 combat sports professional contests between boxing, kickboxing, and now MMA. And I really wonder if beating Alex Pereira was the last real thing he needed for, I don't know, completeness to his journey, and that now he at 35 and with all the success and all the money, he's just not in the same place anymore.
We'll be back to the interview in just a second, but first and foremost, college football is finally back, and Inside Fighting are partnered with DraftKings to bring you an incredible new offer. New DraftKings customers who bet $5 will receive $200 in bonus bets instantly, just by signing up using promo code Inside Fighting. Enjoy. The first question I have that I want to springboard off that is Dricus' style, because there is a lot said about it. There's a lot that he does, quote unquote, technically wrong, but it's effective. So my question to you is, do you anticipate people will, is there part of Dricus' style that we will start to see other fighters emulate, or do you think it's too unique and too specific to his game
Uh,
and his
yeah.
physicality?
It's a very different kind of consideration, but it's almost like asking the same kind of question about Sean Strickland. Sean Strickland's game is not in any way like Dricus's, but what I mean is, it's effective for him, at least in certain ways it can be
Mm,
effective. And like what is Strickland? So, for example, what is Strickland's style good at? It is good at denying momentum. It is good at forcing this kind of trench warfare
mm,
scenario, which you saw with, for example, with Dricus, which you saw with Izzy. And he didn't win the Dricus one, but he's always going to be competitive in those particular kinds of contests that he forced.
mm,
But who's really going to emulate that style? It's just a very unique thing. I really don't get the sense that anyone's going to imitate Dricus, which isn't to say it's not effective or I mean, look at the guys doing it's quite effective. But I just don't buy that they're going to technically take from it. There might be a couple of things that they take from it. I mean, there's
mm,
something to be said about some of his, like, I saw Jack Slack talking about some of his lead leg attacks and how he kind of varies them up and they're hard to tell what's coming. Sure, you might see some stuff from that. But like these lunging off balance blitzes, I just don't think that. I mean, here's the thing. Understand something. Those work. And the point I've been making is people are like, oh, he throws it off balance. But then, dude, look around him. When
mm,
he does this, Izzy, Whitaker, Strickland, these guys get out of the way. It's not like Sean O'Malley who will pivot off at an angle and then try and snipe you
mm,
when you do something like this. These guys are not even trying to do that. They're just trying to get out of the way. And so, who can really replicate that but for someone who introduces that kind of physical, immediate, in your face danger? It's not something you could easily replicate. The second point I would make about that is every style has an expiration date, and whether it's predicated heavily on, someone being really fast twitch muscle fiber or not, every style has an expiration date. Like every style works at its best for a series of conjoining reasons. But once one of those things begins to get undermined, the entire system begins to get questioned. I mean, eventually, when he slows down or his durability no longer is what it is, the style won't work nearly as well anymore. Now,
mm.
that might be for some time, by the way. I'm not saying that that's around the corner. It could be
Yeah.
years, quite literally, before you see something like that. I'm just pointing out that will happen, and when it does, it will come undone. And so you're not really looking at something that is necessarily a genuine innovation. More, you're looking at someone having a series of very specific adaptations that work for them.
Yeah.
So I'm skeptical that it will change the way people fight, but that doesn't matter. It works well for him, and he has ridden that one all the way to the bank.
In terms of the actual result, I always feel like rivalry fights have a big effect on people's legacies because they're so memorable. People will remember, you know, is he getting in the cage at UFC 290? And this subsequent builds up a lot more than presumably Dricus' next title defense because it won't be as volatile, if you will. How much do you think the win for Dricus and the loss for Adesanya will affect both of their legacies going forward?
Let's start with the Izzy one. I don't think it hurts him too much. And it might sound like I'm trying to cover for him, but not really. Like this was my view going into the fight. It didn't matter whether he won or whether he lost. His place as the second best middleweight of all time is sort of firmly entrenched, at least for now. Now, if Dricus keeps winning, then we can revisit this conversation, obviously, or
Mm,
any subsequent champion. But Anderson Silva's record of dominance at middleweight is clearly the best one.
yeah.
And then if you just look at who has the second best record of dominance in elite MMA, it's Izzy. It's Izzy by a wide margin. Like the other guys, any kind of Weidman or Rockhold or anybody else you want to put up there, they just are. You go back even further, Marilla Bustamante and whoever else you
Mm,
want to pick, it's just not there. And so beating Dricus actually wouldn't change that because even though he would have been a three-time champion, that would be interesting.
mm,
But becoming a three-time champion still not as good as Anderson Silva not ever losing it
Of
and then
course.
holding on to it, right? You know what I mean? So
Yeah, of
like
course.
it just didn't change that for him. And I wonder if like that honestly if that kind of thing played into his motivation. Like your place is for at least a little while pretty set.
Mm,
On the Dricus side, it's a little different. On the Dricus side, um, I do think this was a bit of a signature win because the Whitaker win, at least for folks like me, was like very surprising.
mm,
The Strickland win, whether you thought he won or he lost, was very close. At a
yeah.
bare minimum, was close. This was a back and forth fight, but the end result is quite clear and there's really no controversy about it,
Mm,
right? This to me was one of those wins where the rest of the world was finally forced to admit that, at least for right now, this is Dricus's division.
mm,
He's the guy at 185. And I think there was some thought, getting back to what I said previously, folks were like, oh, Izzy's going to come in there and he's going to like, he's going to restore order.
mm.
But the order is being restored and maintained by Dricus. So long term, I think this win will age very well for him. It will do quite a number for him, both in the short run and the long run. But in terms of overall legacy, um, you've got the body of work of Anderson Silva and you've got the body of work of Izzy to go up against. He's still got some work to do to be in that kind of conversation.
What I mean, it's pretty clear what's next for Dricus. It's either Sean Strickland or the winner of Robert Whittaker, Hamzat Chimaev, depending on how that fight plays out. With Izzy, as you say, it's a little bit more different because a traditional number one contender who loses a world title fight would fight another up and comer. For example, we see Caio Borralho versus Jared Cannonier booked for this Saturday night. I don't anticipate Israel Adesanya facing the winner of that fight, even though divisionally that might make some sense. So, what space do you think Izzy has now entered coming off this loss to TTP? Do you envisage a move up to 205? What do you see as likely next steps?
He has apparently indicated he wants to stay at 185. I really don't agree with that. I mean, again, it's his life. What the hell do
Mm,
I care? Or what does he care about what I have to say, rather?
mm,
But I think 205 is like, I mean, I mean, maybe he's sick of the Alex Pereira rivalry, and I could understand that too at 35. And maybe he knows he doesn't have the same kind of competitive fire and doesn't even have the same desire to fight those kind of fights anymore. Like, it really is up to him what he wants. But I'll just say this: 205 is as wide open as I've ever seen it. I mean, you've got Ankalaev. If he doesn't get past Rakic, certainly he's not going to get the title shot. Even if he does and he looks poor, I really wonder about the UFC's belief in the guy. And if Rakic wins, does he get a title shot? Maybe, but he got finished by Yuri in his last fight. So I don't know. But here's what I do know. They just gave a title shot to the number 8 ranked guy. And I'm not even necessarily mad about it in terms of, what kind of fight are we going to get? Probably a pretty fun fight. You know what I mean? Like I'm
mm,
not even suggesting I hate it or something. That's not what I mean. All I'm pointing out is, dude, if you are trying to find a division where getting the biggest fights possible or the most interesting fresh matchups are there, especially if you're coming up from a different division, 205 is like ripe for the picking.
mm.
Maybe he can't. Maybe this version of Izzy can't beat Johnny Walker. Maybe this version of Izzy couldn't beat Khalil Roundtree. I don't know, but at 185, it's a lot of the same people he's already faced. It's a bunch of new ones at 205. 205 is notoriously, even if you don't want to say the word weak, I'll say weak, but let's say inconsistent in terms of what you kind of get from these guys. A lot of them are a little bit older too. I don't know, man. I feel like you could get one win there and you're right back in the sweepstakes. I mean, it's
Mm.
just crazy to know like what opportunity is there. So it seems to me fresh matchups plus you could get a title shot relatively quickly if you really played your cards right. 205 seems like a much better option, but if he stays at 185, I have a feeling that UFC is going to do what every promotion does, which is feed the old to the young, and they're going to use Izzy to build up, the Bo Nichols or whoever's of
Mm.
the next stage of life at 185.
Is there an element of the UFC 307 main event between Alex Pereira and Khalil Roundtree being a quote unquote soft landing for Alex Pereira in the assumption that we could build towards the third fight or the fifth, depending on how you look at it, between Israel and Alex? Do you see that as almost we'll give Alex, we need somebody to fill this slot. Alex is available. We'll give him a easier matchup in the hope that he gets through it. And there's the fight with Adesanya.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's really whether or not they have designs on Izzy, I don't know.
Hmm.
But in terms of the other sort of logic that you mentioned, it's really not even up for debate. I mean, it's quite obviously what they're doing. Now, a big part of it, we should also back up a step, is you've got that Raquel Pennington title fight as your
Of course.
co-main. tons of respect to Raquel. She has really had a very admirable career, but she's not going to headline a pay-per-view, and she's not
Yeah.
going to sell it. It's just not the reality, and you have to kind of accept that. So they had to have some kind of headliner there that they could work with. And for whatever reason, they didn't want Ankalaev in that role, and so they brought in Roundtree, who, again, that's going to be an all-action fight, at least for as long as it lasts, right?
Yeah.
I will also say this. Do I expect Poatan to win? Of course. I definitely do. It definitely seems like he's the better guy. But Roundtree is dangerous,
Yeah.
and I think there's a lot of people being like, "Oh, this is an easy fight for Poatan." Well, those are, dude. I have watched enough MMA to see promoters give their star fighters gimmies, and then when you least expect it, it blows up in your face. I watched Fedor fight Verdum. Let me assure you, there were not a lot of people who thought Verdum had a shot in hell, and then of course he did exactly what you thought he could not do.
Yeah.
So these kinds of things happen. But to your point, like, what is their aim? Their aim, I think, is that they needed a headliner. He's a stay busy guy. This is a fun fight that he should be in the operative word, win. And then I think they're going to see, let's say what happens with Ankalaev. I think they wanted to see what was going to happen with Izzy, blah, 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 and then make a call from there.
I have to move. I'm going to skip over the co-main event between Steve Erceg and Kai Kara France. Fantastic win by Kai Kara France, but I want to talk about Dan Hooker because what a win. I mean, I was asked last week for my prediction on that fight, and I was pretty confident it was a 30-27 for Mateusz Gamrot. So what Dan did on Saturday night is super impressive. I guess the question I have for you is, does it change? Did Dan's win on Saturday change your opinion on what he can do in this division? I.e., do you feel like his trajectory is still forwards towards the title fight, potentially? Or do you feel like this is a quote unquote Indian summer, a fantastic win, one that will, has certainly added to his legacy, but won't do much going forward in terms of moving up, further up the division?
Man, I'm with you. I didn't see this coming at all. So now you're like, wait a second, how did I miss this?
Mm,
I mean, dude, understand something about Dan Hooker. Like, if you've watched his career, he's not only he's had a long one and he's had like tough fights, he's had brutal fights
yeah.
too. He's had a couple of fights that were like, get the stretcher ready. The Barboza fight, the Poirier
Mm,
fight in particular are like this, but there's been other ones as well. So like, not only is he older in a tough division where it's hard to get older, and he was never like a dominant, submission grappler type. Well,
mm,
he's got some jujitsu obviously, but not like, against this new wave of like the Islams and stuff. You just didn't think
yeah.
there was going to be anything to it. And then what happened? He was very competitive on the feet. Obviously, you knew that was going to be the case, but like just in terms of like staying in Gamrot's face, and then more to the point, using that power guillotine and other measures to force Gamrot back down to escape the submission. So now you are in a world where we're judging control in jiu-jitsu or grappling less if it doesn't ultimately lead to ground and pound or some kind of submission attempt. And on top of it, he's the one using submission attempts to thwart the takedown, which the judge is going to always look more favorably on than not. Like, he thread just the right kind of needle at the right time to get a very, to me, surprising result. I thought between him being older and shop worn and this just being a bad style matchup, there was no possible way he could get this. And then look at what he does. Now, he eked it out, but he got it done. Jesus Christ, like, you're asking what's possible. I really, really don't want to diminish what is possible from a guy like this, in part, especially because I was wrong. On the other hand, Gamrot has had a few of these really close ones that he kind of, I won't say got away with, but the judges ultimately sided with him, but it could
Mm,
have been very close
yeah.
the other way. And the other part I'm going to say is, well, now you're up against, he's ranked now 5. He's ranked 5 in the division. Man, there's heavy hitters up there. Dustin Poirier is a heavy hitter. Rafael Fiziev, if they give him, is a heavy hitter. There's Justin Gaethje, heavy hitter. Charles Oliveira can be a heavy hitter, but also a multi-dimensional threat. So, like, out of the frying pan into the fire. Obviously, Hooker is an old dog that learned some new tricks, but he's still an old dog.
Mm.
And I just don't want to lose sight of that. You know what I mean?
What would you like to see from him next? I mean, I feel like his performance on Saturday night, you would always class Dan Hooker as a BMF, but a performance like that unlocks the potential for a BMF showdown. And I feel like there's a worry with the BMF that it could become a little bit of a merry-go-round where the same guys are fighting for it over and over. So the addition of Dan Hooker to that is certainly interesting. But what would you like to see for him next?
I don't think you can go wrong. I don't think there's any way to go wrong.
Mm,
So, for example, they wanted him to do Charles Oliveira. Fine. That's a great fight, fresh matchup. I think that'd be awesome. I would favor Charles Oliveira to win, but dude, I mean, worst case scenario, it's going to be awesome. You could do a thing where you wait for Max, depending on how things go with Ilya, for a BMF fight at 155. That would be interesting as well. Although I'm sure Hooker would even agree to go down to 145. Not that I want to see that, but he probably would.
Mm.
Or the one I wanted to see was him versus Justin Gaethje. I think you got two old dogs who'd be willing to, like, you know, still got a little bit of life left in them and be willing to throw down. That's a tremendous fight. But like literally any of those, literally any of those. Or you could do Poirier rematch. You could do that one again. This is what I mean. You've got the guys in this division, and then Hooker getting back to this. There's no combination that doesn't work. I don't think it really matters. I just think that the UFC has to figure out what's good for those guys and what's good for their schedule.
We just saw Steve Erceg fight for a world title after 3 UFC fights. Carlos Prates knocks out Li Jingliang in his 3rd UFC fight. Do we just say F it and give him Bilal Muhammad next?
No, he needs to fight somebody who can put up a stern resistance. However, he looks to be great. I mean, the whole smoking cigarettes bit is just a fun little side thing. But on top of that, his left hand is dynamite. He keeps giving guys problems with it. He must be disguising it very well. He covers distance with it very well. It's obviously quite powerful. He can peel out pretty well sometimes under pressure as well. He's got some tricks defensively too. He is a very, very exciting fighter. And I don't necessarily need to see him like go through 4 wrestlers before we get here. But there's some people in front. I mean, like, this is a division where Sean Brady is ahead of him. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
you got some work. Look at what Bilal Muhammad had to do to get to this point. Like, you got some work to do. However, I want to say something. You know, we are right to note that most of these guys coming out of the Contender Series are not up to snuff and that they're underpaid. But there are some gems that come out of that series as well. He appears to be one of them.
Yeah, 100%. I wanted to finish by doing something a little bit differently, Luke, because over the last 3 or 4 weeks, we've seen Bilal Muhammad win a world title and Dricus Du Plessis defend the world title. 2 guys who, a couple of years ago, I think if someone had told most of MMA fans 2024 those guys would be champions at the same time, they would not have believed you. So it very much feels like we're in a dark horse period for some of these champions, especially when we look at Bilal and Dricus. So I've made a list of some of the more wide open divisions, and I wanted to get your thoughts on who you see as some potential dark horses in some of those divisions, if that works for you.
Let's do it.
So first one I've got 135 pounds bantamweight. Who do you look at and think in a couple of years' time they could be a serious player?
Ooh. Well, right now, I would tell you I'm very interested in what happens with Figueroa. I did not know how his power was going to translate up and everything. Pretty good. he's legit at 135. Holy crap. Next stage up at 135. That is a good one. I don't know offhand. Do you have a name that rings true to you?
I'm liking Kyler Phillips and I'm liking Mario Batista just in that top 15 range. I think those 2 guys are very interesting.
Both are great. Mario Batista a little bit more wide open. I would need to see it on the defensive end, but Kyler Phillips to me has been one of the quietest and best prospects we've seen in some time. The guy's doing incredible work, and I don't know if a lot of folks have paid attention. I would fully agree with Kyler Phillips.
However, he is fighting my friend Rob Font, who you know I'm very close with, so you do know
Yeah,
who
yeah.
I'll be siding with in
But
that one.
but this is what I mean. That's a quality opponent. That's a super quality opponent. You can get past that, you're off to the races.
Lightweight, who would you pick for 155?
Man, lightweight's a bit of a different one because I thought that all of these older guys would have been pushed out by now and that we would see it through. I've not given up hope at all on Jalen Turner. I think he's got some work to do, but I feel like his striking when it's firing is some of the very best in the division. And obviously he's got work to do on some of the physicality of the wrestling, the chain wrestling in particular, the scrambling. But I think it'd be wrong to write a guy like that off. He's extremely talented, and I really like his game.
We'll skip down a division now to 145. So who would you have for featherweight?
That's a tough one too. Obviously, the problem for that division is Ilya, I think, is still in his 20s, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So, you know, we'll see what happens with Max. But if he gets past Max, the likelihood he's going to be there a while, I think, to me is pretty strong. Candidly, I don't even know if I have a 145 on the horizon that stands out. Do you?
Arnold Allen, I would pose. I mean, he's ranked number 5, so maybe a little bit too high to count as an up and comer. But I do still think I'm liking what I'm seeing, and even his 2 losses recently, a split against Movsar Evloev and 3 rounds of 2 against Max Holloway, are two two defeats to hang your head on. So I would go with our boy from England, Arnie.
He's a little old for me, and I love him. He's extremely talented. I don't know if I would see him beating the likes of Topuria.
Mm,
But Movsar is interesting in the shorter run.
mm,
Aljo, by the way, is interesting depending on what happens at that fight in Salt Lake City against
yes.
Movsar, right? That's an interesting one too, actually. I don't know if I see some like young guy in their mid-20s at 145 right at this moment. I could be forgetting somebody, but
Diego Lopez, perhaps?
certainly somebody you would have to include in the conversation.
Mm,
Yes. I think he's still a little bit untested against the. I mean, I know he fought Ige, but it was like the craziest of
yeah.
circumstances. So I guess we'll still have to see. But yes, he is obviously in that conversation as well.
I have a feeling I know who you're going to say for this one, but what about 170 pounds welterweight?
That's a good one. Got to be Shavkat Rakhmonov or Jack Della Maddalena. I think either of those two are the ones that are got. I mean, it's hard to call them dark horses, right? That's really not the
True.
spirit of the question. But it's also unclear about how those two are going to play out,
Mm,
and like what that's going to look like. In terms of like the a stage less than that, I haven't seen any like no one like when Shavkat was coming through, he came from um like a good regional background, like on M1, and you kind of saw him develop, and then he just kept beating and beating and beating and beating all these guys and then finishing them off. Like when he got to the UFC, I didn't quite know who he was, but within like 2 fights, I was like, whoa, this guy's completely different.
mm,
I don't know if I've seen someone right now, like 2 fights into UFC at 170, where I'm like, oh, this guy's completely different.
mm.
So I can't quite dig that far into the bag, but I feel like the future between those two will kind of settle where things go for the next 5 years or something like that.
Final one from me. What about 185 middleweight? So we've just talked about Dricus defeating Adesanya. Who do you have as the next guy coming up to potentially challenge him?
I don't think that things are going exactly as planned, and I want to be clear about that. But I just can't write off the notion that Bo Nickel could do something pretty special.
Mm,
Now, again, this fight against Cody Brundage, he didn't exactly impress the world. And even before that, I forget who he fought, Jamie Pickett. That one wasn't super impressive either. And he was blowing the doors off some of these other guys. Still, some of the flashes I've seen of brilliance have been just that brilliant. So I think that there is a lot of work to be done. And I'm not in any way declaring, oh, he's the future of this division. I
mm,
don't know. I really don't know if he is. But there is enough there that makes me think that, if anybody could turn into something special, he's got it. But dude, you know what? How about Anthony Hernandez, Fluffy, big
great shot.
Fluffy over there?
Yeah.
Dude, no one talks about this guy. He's very, very, very good. He might be kryptonite for all of these guys. So some of the younger guys actually at 185 are, and even Roman Kopylov, like he's going to win some,
Mm,
he's going to lose some, but he's dangerous. So Brendan Allen, like there's a lot
mm.
of those guys actually at 185 that I feel like are could make a huge stamp on the division going forward.
I will also throw in Kyle Bahalio, who's in action on Saturday night against
100%.
Jared Cannonier. Um,
100%.
last question from me, Luke. Thank you so much for the time that people need to know because I did see your rant on Monday's show about the PFL one-to-one interviews. So will you be attending the PFL press conference yesterday? And did you get your one-to-one interview scheduled?
No, they're not going to do it. So I have to maintain my schedule. Yeah, I mean, I'll watch it, but from home. But I mean, just the reality is this: like, people can like this or they can hate this, and I don't think this is good for media. To be honest with you, I don't think it's good that we have to make choices like, oh, what's going to give us the greatest return?
Of course. Yeah.
That's what I'm going to devote all of my attention to. I actually don't feel like that's great. I really
Yeah.
don't. However, now that like media institutions are largely crumbling, and this is advertising no longer works the way that it once did, these are the choices that you have to make. It sucks, but that's where we are. And so if that's the case, and all I'm going to get is I can record all the same things that everybody else can record, it doesn't. I mean, I'm not even trying to be a dick about it, but like that doesn't do anything for me.
Yeah.
So no. So I guess that's what they wanted.
What do you make of the card? Francis Ngannou versus Renan Ferreira and Chris Cyborg versus
I think those
Pacheco?
two fights are great. I think those two. Look, I'm not even backing on the event. I think that there's huge questions about Francis Ngannou and where he is after being viciously KO'd. And then obviously this horrific tragedy about his infant son. I mean, these are terrible, terrible things. in different ways, obviously, and in different magnitudes, but they both have a significant effect on one's ability to perform athletically in a very dangerous combat sports. Renan Ferreira has the wind at his back if he loses. Everyone kind of expects him to, but he's huge, he's fast, he's powerful. Like I'm telling you right now, yeah, if Francis knocks him out, everyone's gonna be like, oh yeah, right, some PFL scrub, dude. If Renan Ferreira knocks out or stops or whatever, beats Francis, I'm telling you now, that's not surprising. It's not surprising. Those odds should be, I don't know if they are, they should be very close. And by the way, how about Larissa Pacheco, dude? She already beat Kayla Harrison.
Mm.
Cyborg is long in the tooth and she's very decorated, but Pacheco is a hammer. That one to me is also super exciting. And can you imagine in the Dricus comes out and stops Robert Whitaker, stops Izzy. How about Pacheco if she goes in there and beats Kayla Harrison and then beats Cyborg? You know, a lot of people that no one saw coming comes in here and just starts wrecking shop on all the favorites. Those are great fights. I love those two fights. So I hope the card does well.
100%. Well, Luke, it is always a pleasure catching up. It really, really is. Thank you so much for giving me so much of your time, not only today, but over the years. And thank you again, and look forward to seeing and consuming much more of your work.
Gotcha, bro. Thank you.